Okay, well, it's time for another edition of This Is Us. We are talking every Tuesday at 7:30 a.m. 7:30 a.m. to Yatish Nasi and Lebang Hossana to unpack what we can all do in South Africa, and we can all do something to spread a little positivity, kindness, and good in the country. Inequality in South Africa, where climate change was when Al Gore was making movies. Sorry, let me read that again. Inequality is in South Africa, where climate change was when Al Gore was making movies. The data is mounting, but the awareness and urgency to act is just not there. How do we get more people to act? Well, today we're joined by Jaynisha Patel, who is Peace, Human and Security Development Researcher at the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. And Jaynisha joins us today. Let's speak to her. Jaynisha, first of all, let me just introduce Yatish to those who have not had the pleasure of meeting Yatish on This Is Us before. I heard you had some really interesting conversations with Mike Abel last week, Yatish.
We did. How's it going, everybody? Morning.
Very good.
Hey.
Yeah, I listened to the podcast afterwards, and he really is a hugely inspirational human being, and obviously someone in the same field as you are in, and someone who you guys were bouncing ideas off each other solidly there.
Yeah, Mike's obviously sort of really old hand, and seen it all before. So, some of the things he'd spoken about as well, even after he and I connected and had a bit of a conversation, and it's why we're so excited to have Jaynisha on the show today, because some of the stuff he spoke about is how these movements very quickly become virtue signaling, right? Sort of armchair activists. People stick a picture up or whatever, but don't actually do things and address the actual challenges. And we spoke so much about particularly how much of a challenge inequality is in South Africa. And if you look at the research and some of the stuff that Jaynisha and the team have been doing, and you see the sort of data coming out, and sure, the reports they put out are 80 pages long, but if you take the time and you go through it and you look at some of those highlights, it's a problem staring us in the face. We're arguably the most unequal country in the world. So if you think about stuff we need to do, those are the areas we're going to have to focus on and think about what we all do every day to try to address those challenges.
Yeah.
Well, let's do that. Let's get straight to it. Jaynisha, it's very nice to have you on the show. How are you?
Good morning. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. How's everyone else doing?
Good. Nice to see you. Tell us about yourself and the work that you do at the IJR.
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. So the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation was started in 2000, so a lot longer than I've been there. But it was sort of born out of the TRC to sort of almost continue the work that the TRC was doing in terms of nation building, reconciliation, unity, and those sorts of things. But has since grown so much more. The IJR now does peace building, builds capacity in peace building infrastructures across the continent and sort of many post-conflict societies. And then what we also do is policy and research, and that's sort of where I come in. And so in our research and policy team, two things that we focus on are sort of public opinion data, and then also the production of a knowledge base that is useful for Africans and civil society organizations, governments, international organizations, a whole host of actors. So when we're talking about public opinion data, we collect these on two fronts. So we have, or we house rather, the Afrobarometer, which is a Pan-African public opinion survey that collects Africans' opinions on democracy, governance, the economy, all sorts of things. So it's just a handful of themes covered in the survey. And then we also have the South African Reconciliation Barometer, or the SARB for short, not to be confused with the South African Reserve Bank. But what the SARB does is really measures the national temperature on themes of reconciliation, unity, social cohesion, racial reconciliation, and so forth. And consistently, what we find from the SARB every year is that South Africans say that the biggest thing that divides our nation is the gap between the rich and the poor, or inequality, really. And so that's where my project then comes in. I lead a project called Inclusive Economies that really reaches researches the nexus between unequal economic growth and instability, or scarcity and instability, and sort of how can we get to peaceful, socially cohesive societies through sort of inclusive development and narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor.
Lebang and Yatish, you go ahead. I know you've got lots of questions on this front, and I'll bring up the rear in a minute.
Sure. I mean, I think that the place to start is arguably, especially if you look at the incidents in July, right? I mean, all of us, some people saw it and were surprised by it. I guess, given the work you guys do, you probably saw this. You probably saw this coming years in advance, right? Or had a sense that something like this was kind of brewing. The more unequal we are, like you say, the more the chance of that instability sort of really rearing its head. Now, I've seen some say we're one of the most. I've seen others say we are the most. I mean, if we set the record straight, where are we globally in terms of inequality in South Africa? How bad is it for us versus everybody else in the world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, there's so many ways to measure inequality, and I think that's probably where the confusion comes in. You can sort of look at the Gini coefficient, and I don't want to get too technical, but for many years we've used the Gini coefficient to measure inequality, and so that puts us in sort of the top 5. But more recently, the World Inequality Lab released a fantastic data set that looks at sort of income inequality and also wealth inequality, so sort of how capital is distributed within a national economy. And when we look at those two indicators to measure inequality, then South Africa actually comes out right on the top in terms of sort of the distribution of specifically income inequality.
Yeah, I'm gonna have some very controversial things to say at the end of this. I'll just wait for Lebang to have her say.
And I really did say that you're gonna really enjoy this. So, Jay, yesterday I told myself, you know what, let me just try something different. And as I was driving, I bought a pack of bananas, and there was a guy in the back of a bakkie, and he just was minding his business. And I opened the window and I said, "Hey, would you like a banana?" And obviously he took it and he was like, "Thank you so much." And he then got scolded by the guy who was driving the bakkie. Started shouting at him like, "What are you doing? Can't just be taking things from people. Face the front and let's keep it moving." And I was just like, damn, this is so hectic. Oh, is there a possibility that this inequality is working for the people that have the power? Because I'm in a place where I'm trying to get the solutions. I'm trying to close that gap. But why is there like this trend of keeping it in that way from your research perspective?
So I think what you're really pointing to is that South Africa is a society of haves and have-nots, and these are sort of held in place by various structural barriers. Some of them sort of being our sort of inability to reconcile sort of injustices from the past. But if we talk about South Africa today, there is so much that divides us as a nation, and I'll maybe just give you some sort of findings from our reconciliation barometer, because that really gets to the heart of what makes people feel less unified, or really what divides South Africans. And so when we talk about sort of interpersonal trust, and that's horizontal trust, and that sort of trust between society, we see that South Africans really say that they trust their relatives and their neighbors the most. And then as we sort of move down the spectrum, we see that people say they sort of trust their colleagues. And on the lower end of the spectrum, where sort of interpersonal trust is the lowest, it's for foreign nationals, from people of a different sexual orientation, and people from other race groups. And so there's almost this sort of barrier between people on these sort of demographic bases and sort of interpersonal bases, and perhaps it speaks to sort of a lack of compassion, a lack of really understanding each other's circumstances, and maybe we've sort of lost sight of that. I don't know if that answers your question very well.
Yeah,
and I guess the thing for me that and there's two things that always throw me as well. So the one is you look at some of the sort of data, and it shows that we've become more reliant post-90, like more reliant on grants and more reliant on those sort of structures post-94. So two things I think that could probably happen and it's probably where Gareth's going to probe soon, right? Is what you don't want, obviously, is for this to become an issue of just, there should be more charity, more handouts, more, because it's not that, right? It's about giving people economic agency. It's about giving people the ability to find a way out versus just handing things out. I think that's really important. The other thing that's potentially really important, maybe we've lost sight of, and when you talk about horizontal trust, I really want to probe there, because I think it was such a fascinating piece out of the research, is, so much of our conversation, our narrative is about South Africa. And it's often easy to forget that the country is composed of South Africans, right? And it's actually where the effort should be is between each other, as opposed to just about the nation, right? It's about, you can't be patriotic for South Africa as a country and not offer the banana as Labang did to a South African, and that, with This Is Us, I think those are the issues we're trying to think about, is the relationship gap we have as a society between our country and the people that make up the country, who we are versus what South Africa is. And I think those issues for me are probably where a lot of that nation building work needs to happen. It's not about politics, not about the national anthem, it's not about the rugby team. It's about how we behave amongst each other that ultimately it plays a big role.
Yeah, I mean, you've said so many things there. I think, nation building is a factor of symbols. So, the national anthem and sort of, the sports team and that sort of thing. But when we're talking about society as a whole, or before we get there, let's sort of talk about the relationship between our society and our government, sort of the state-society relationship. And without getting too theoretical, in South Africa, it's not a very strong one. And, there's various reasons for that, but we see that if we're talking about trust, and I know that's something that you're specifically interested in at This Is Us, and if we talk about vertical trust specifically, and so that's trust between society and the state, we see that South Africans don't have trust in state institutions. In 2021, we fielded our Afrobarometer survey between May and June, and we asked people how much sort of trust they have in various institutions, and sort of at the top of the list, where 2 and 3 South Africans said they have a lot or somewhat trust, sort of independent broadcasters sort of came out on the top of the list in terms of who South Africans trust the most. At the bottom of the list was, local councillors, the police, the ruling party, their provincial premier, the parliament. And so you can sort of see that South Africans there's a huge disconnect between sort of South Africans trusting their state. And then when we talk about horizontal trust, we see that South Africans trust slightly more traditional leaders, community leaders, courts of law. So yeah, I mean, religious leaders as well. And so
I don't know. It surprises me that you guys are surprised by any of this, because it's patently obvious to me that we live in a society where all of these things are given. We don't need to be researching it. Inequality is observable to even the least educated among us. I don't believe, though, that inequality deserves the amount of attention that it seems to get every day. Do you really think, any of you, that a poor person who's sitting unemployed in an awful part of South Africa, trying their best to just make it through the day, is that interested in the gap between them and someone very, very rich? I think they're just trying to survive. And it would be patronizing to almost insinuate anything else. I also think that these problems, while they are observable and measurable by Gini coefficient or any other means, it doesn't help to solve the problem. All we do is end up scolding the rich, and we create this idea of the virtuous poor without being able to justify either. And we don't do anything to improve their lives. So we talk about it. And we talk and talk and talk. And all it does is it makes the people who are privileged in society feel better, because they feel like they're paying attention to the problem instead of actually solving it. I don't think inequality is an issue. I like inequality. I want to be as unequal to everyone else as possible as a person. And South Africa provides that in bucket loads. You can make a huge difference here, even if you have absolutely nothing. This country needs solutions.
Yeah, so where I'd push you, Gareth, is yes, inequality is observable, right? 100%. But I'm
completely uninteresting even to the poor and the rich.
Correct, potentially. But again, I'm gonna use the analogy because often it helps, right? Using analogies helps you understand things because you can compare it to something else. So the reason why we said, you've got to compare inequality to sort of climate change is, I think many opinions were where you were 20 years ago, to say lots of data, why are we researching it, etc., etc. Some
Yatish,
of the
if I may, I mean, climate
Yes.
change and inequality are two unsolvable problems, which is why people in academia are obsessed with them, because they never have to actually find a solution to them. Climate change is not going to be fixed by any of us, not even Greta Thunberg, with all the love in the world, and neither is inequality. These are two things that have assaulted humanity since our dawn. There is no way we can control the weather. There is no way we can control volcanoes. There's no way we can control the level of the sea, and there's no way we can stop being unequal. There is no society in history where it's been equal for everyone. Not once, not even in a small city state.
100%. But the issue, I think, that we really feel there is a chance and there is an opportunity is when you talk about this idea of vertical versus horizontal trust. The least we can do, Gareth, the least we can do is at least behave in a way that is beneficial to how we behave, how we sort of have interpersonal trust with each other, right? As South Africans, at least the least we can do to sort of put pressure on. Yeah.
Jaynisha just told you people have the least faith in the state.
Correct.
Yet we keep looking to the state to solve all of our problems. Again, I refer to the people of Harrismith, who I regard as being silent heroes in South Africa. They went out, the people of the townships and the suburbs, the rich and the poor, supposedly. I mean, no one in Harrismith is probably very rich by anyone else's estimation. But they all went out. They fixed the sewage plant themselves. They made sure that they retarred the road. They made sure that they made all kinds of changes to the highway that goes through them, which is their lifeblood. And that community, while they're not thriving, at least came together and worked. You mentioned the riots earlier, as if that was an expression of rich versus poor. It wasn't. It was a political activity fomented by people who cynically thought that they could use the poor for their advantage and to their advantage. That wasn't about rich and poor. It wasn't a whole bunch of poor people who decided this is our time to steal from the macro because there's inequality. This was about politics. These people were politically motivated, and the people who tried to motivate them politically were trying to make a statement about their own importance. Tremendously rich people who spend most of the year in Dubai. This is not about poor South Africans taking matters into their own hands. No.
Gareth, you're completely right that when we're talking about what happened with the looting, that it sort of started as factional fighting within the ANC among, extremely sort of well-off political elite. But what makes society vulnerable to instability is to have large segments of society who are consistently and perpetually materially deprived, because that allows for sort of political actors and populist narratives to take hold. And we see that across Africa. We see that where there's a large materially deprived population relative to sort of how wealthy the political and economic elite are, and that's sort of where we're talking about inequality, where we see that gap is really big, it leaves room for the elite, whether we're talking about political elite or economic elite, to sort of co-opt society and use the poor to sort of, to meet their own ends in a way, for a lack of a better phrase, in this particular moment. And that's exactly what we saw in June. And so when we're talking about studying inequality, we're really looking at its impact on society and how it sort of it opens society up to greater instability, because pockets of people can sort of be used, taken advantage of, and are more prone to participating in violence, and specifically in political violence, because the opportunity cost for them to participate in violence is slightly lower. They're giving up a lot less. And so, that's really what we're interested in, trying to understand how inequality and material deprivation can open societies up to being vulnerable to more instability, to being co-opted by populist narratives, and those sorts of things. So you're absolutely right that it started as a political.
I concur with you completely on the fact that these things are exploited. But again, I say with tears in my eyes that us talking about inequality is not going to do anything. You think those poor people who were who are feeling disenfranchised and left behind and living in anarchy because their own municipalities are falling apart. You think those people are listening to us this morning go, yeah, that's what I need to hear. They're not. They're trying to survive today. That's what they're trying to do. Getting out there, selling whatever they can, making a deal, trying to help their kids get through school. They're also dealing with the pandemic and all of the consequences of that. And I'm just feeling like this inequality conversation is something rich people have.
I don't know, like Gareth, I mean, a lot has been said and a lot can be said. Two things. Like, there is a little bit of an obsession that people in low income jobs or people that maybe don't even have jobs really do have with the rich. They are right next door. They are living in your backyard. They are looking at your mansion from their shack. There is this major obsession with, why can't I have that? What's so different about me that I can't have that? So I think when we bring forward this inequality conversation, it's in no way to make, the rich people feel like, oh, they're doing something. And I disagree. I think that a lot of people in lower income places do want to hear this and do want to participate in these spaces that they previously aren't allowed in. And why Jaynisha is here is to put emphasis on the solutions. Us, as this is us, we're saying, what is it that we can do? Not to make Karen feel better, not to make whoever in their high rise feel like, oh yeah, no, I am playing my part. Inequality is hectic. There's 9 bathrooms being shared by 3,000 people in a township, and you'll have no idea because you're so far removed. So the point is, hopefully this can spark something in you so you can feel like, shit, let me just get off my ass. Let's focus on solutions. What is it that we can do? That horizontal trust place, this is what we're here to discuss. And that's why Jaynisha is here.
Yeah, and I think also just to build on that, it's so important. Again, you mentioned things like there's nothing that can be done about climate change. There's nothing that can be done about inequality. I think what we're focused on is not solving inequality. That's not what this is about. What it's saying is what its impact. What it's starting to do is break down the trust between people in South Africa. And what that research is demonstrating is that a simple way to get back on the path to nation building is to start behaving between each other in a way that rebuilds trust horizontally. That's where the gap is. It's not about solving inequality. It's dealing with the impacts of it. That really is what we should be focusing on.
How do we, so when we say rebuilding horizontal trust, what are we talking about? Rebuilding trust in institutions, rebuilding trust between each other?
So when we're talking about, when we're talking about vertical trust, we're talking about trust between the society and the state. Right. That's a vertical relationship. We're talking about horizontal trust. We're talking about trust among society.
And we all agree that vertical trust is not a problem that we're going to even attempt at solving because we've been misled by our politicians. All right. So horizontal trust, I think there is. And you brought up the riots and looting earlier. I saw a lot of communities coming together there. I saw people trusting their neighbors for the first time in ages. I saw people looking after each other, trying to help old people to find milk and bread. I saw people going in and trying to rally support for each other and for the things that counted in their neighborhoods. I think we have enormous amounts of horizontal trust in communities, as Jaynisha's already told us. People in churches, people in mosques, people, those are communities. Those people do trust each other, and they know they can rely on each other in a tough situation.
So, Gareth, what you're really speaking to is social solidarity, and a lot of research points to that social solidarity peaks sort of during and immediately after a crisis, and so it's almost like a curve, and then it starts to go down. And so I think what this is us is trying to do, and maybe you'll be able to say a bit more, but to keep that solidarity going. We saw that when COVID just sort of hit our shores and we went into lockdowns. We tried to measure social solidarity in South Africa, and we saw that it peaked. And there was so much from sort of action networks and all sorts of things. And then again after the looting, we saw that there was so much social solidarity. So how do we keep that going then after things died down? And this is us really helps to spark a debate about how to keep that going, and how we can continue to mend that horizontal trust, because often after a crisis and things settle down, people retreat back to themselves and don't have the capacity, whether it's sort of the material capacity, the emotional capacity, to continue supporting their community in such an onerous way. But you guys are absolutely right. We should be talking about solutions. We should be talking about what can we be doing, and what can This Is Us be doing. And something that's come out of consultations that we've been doing at the IJR in communities with community leaders, and so this is a collection of qualitative, not quantitative data, is that, and this happened from April to June, so it happened through the looting as well. We had sort of 3 months of consultations with leaders, and some of the things that came out, and I think this would be interesting for you, Tish, and hopefully for your viewers as well, is that that people feel in communities that they don't have a space to come together. And I think, this speaks to sort of building unity and solidarity among South Africans. And so, it's a very simple and successful method that's been used all over the world in sort of conflict resolution and building trust. And it's just for communities to be able to convene in shared spaces, and for members of communities to be able to engage with each other. And this helps with what we call bridging and bonding. And so bridging is really bringing together people of sort of different groups who won't usually socialize, and bonding refers to bonding within groups where people would usually socialize. And so young people say that they don't really have places to convene, they don't have green spaces, and those sorts of things. And it's not for a lack of space, it's often for a lack of safe space as well. And this comes down to sort of addressing security concerns. We know we have this low trust in SAPS, and everyone's got an awful story about SAPS that they've personally experienced. And so how can we keep these safe spaces safe? Are there options for community policing? And that's a question. I don't know the answer to it, because without a sense of safety, people will always have their guard up when interacting with strangers or people that they wouldn't usually interact, because they fear, sort of both a loss of material things, and also they fear injury, sexual abuse, loss of life, and that sort of thing. And so if we're always wary of each other, we don't have safe spaces to come together, we're not going to trust each other, we're not going to break down those barriers. And then if we're talking about sort of economic solutions specifically at a grassroots level, there's a lack of sort of spaces for people to convene who have similar economic activities, so spaces that facilitate cooperation rather than competition. Specifically referring to small businesses, informal businesses, and that sort of thing. And what we find in our reconciliation barometer, and Gareth, this is where collecting the data is quite useful, is that we find that people identify 4 main barriers to attaining their goals. And those are sort of the obvious financial resources, but a less obvious one is access to the right people, or access to the networks of right people. So people lack the social capital. And this is also where inequality comes in, because inequality sort of insulates networks of social capital among an elite, and people at a community level don't have access to these networks. So how do we bring these networks to people? Studies of the labor market in South Africa show that one of the reasons that we have such a huge unemployment crisis is because there's labor market mismatch. Employees can't get to the right employers for various reasons, access to internet, access to economic hubs like urban city centers and those sorts of things. So how do we bring these networks of sort of economic opportunity to people, so that it's not hugely expensive for them, but also just, in instances where they can't access these networks of social capital because they're so insulated in South Africa because of inequality. So, these are sorts of things that we should be looking at. We should be asking ourselves if we're talking about sort of community-centered solutions that focus on building trust and sort of bonding among society. I'll stop there for to hear what you guys think.
I think it's so cool that you brought up that from your research it's showing that people are feeling like there's like a bit of a lack within that community and safety. And the 2 women that I interviewed a couple of weeks ago on my show with regards to This Is Us, these women basically have nothing, and they had to create that space for themselves. So in the same way that we're not waiting for the solutions to fall out the sky, in the same way that the government is not going to do anything for us, these women, with the little that they had, I think that the mother lost her job. She had been selling food all of her life, and then COVID happened. She couldn't sell food on the side of the road anymore. So she decided to make food for the hungry kids in the community off of nothing. So that sense of community was built by just her deciding that this is what I'm going to do now. So it just takes one person is another thing that we need to realize. It's not going to be this huge show with glitter and sparkles. It's just going to take one or two people to come together, and that sense of community will just sort of, it'll be so hard to escape it. One of the ladies was saying that, you know, people would drive past and just park their cars on the side of the road and say to them, what's going on here? We're just seeing a bunch of people. There's like an energy. What's happening? It just attracted more and more people. So that sense of community is something that, you know, you can't run away from it. Once it's there, it'll be very hard to miss. So it's just about one person just trying and building that horizontal trust.
Yeah, and the people on usually that you speak to, Lebang, on a Thursday, you know, for me, and it's to the point you made about solidarity at the moment is a reaction, right? It's often a reaction to a crisis. But the people you're talking to on Thursday are not reacting to crisis. They're reacting to the day-to-day reality, which what we're saying, Gareth, is in crisis. That's the difference, you know, and that's the thing to think about.
Yeah, I look, I don't disagree with, I think, first of all, Jaynisha, you've been extremely valuable on the show this morning. And I find that the kind of thing that you are talking about to be not only interesting, but useful in a practical sense to us, because we can implement the research that you do and try to find ways of doing things better. And, you know, if you aren't doing that, then really, what are you doing as a society? I just feel like a lot of the time I hear what is commonly referred to in academic circles as the white savior complex being behind all of this stuff. It's like a study of these statistics in order to create grievance culture. And I think in South Africa, we must be very careful not to go down that street because of the reasons you've already postulated. The fact that we can't have, for example, the growth of an unfettered populism as a reciprocal action to people just complaining about how difficult and how dangerous and how unpleasant most people's lives are. The moment we do that, all we're doing is we're feeding into the nonsense that people who talk a lot and do nothing love to do. And we can't give those people any more quarter. They have led us in many ways down a path that has brought us nothing but suffering. And I'm concerned often when I hear about inequality that it's really just a ruse to try and make rich and powerful people feel better about the fact that they're exploiting. We know who the people are exploiting us in this country. It's politicians. It's people who in business are in graft and in crony capitalism. We know who these people are. And it's wrong for us to characterize our own society as being the problem when these people have made the society what it is. And we need to be very clear about that. Otherwise, we're not going to address the disease. We'll address a symptom of the disease. That, to me, is the major concern. So as much as all of this information is particularly useful and poignant in a place like South Africa, there are also other countries where inequality is a major thing, but they just don't care about it and they keep moving. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Jamaica, Venezuela.
I think, you know, you mentioned so many of these countries, but in a place like India, for example, inequality is actually improving. And, you know, you say it's a ruse, but
that's because of technology, not because they've set up safe spaces in communities. Promise you that.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's absolutely been a better dispersion of technology, access to internet, you know, and those sorts of things. And, you know, in South Africa, we need to be talking about those things as well. We need to be doing them rather. You know, there's been a failure to sort of lay internet cables across the country in marginalized communities. And but again, these are sort of things that the state ought to be doing. And here we're talking about what society can be doing. You know, a community can't go out and lay their own internet cables. They can't. They can't do it. But we also find in our research that South Africans don't have access to computers. They more likely access the internet from their cell phone. And a very small portion of people that we survey say that they have a computer in their household. And so
this does everything you need it to do anyway. I mean, mobile first is probably where we're ahead of the rest of the world. I don't think that's behind. Computer schmuter, you need this. And I think education is part of the problem that we have here because, again, we have been so reliant on the state. And this goes back to apartheid, obviously. You know, South Africans were used to black and white being told what to do by the government. And then suddenly we found ourselves responsible for ourselves. And we decided, oh, hell, the only adults in the room are us. So let's get on with it. There are still people, though, who are hoping that some kind of Messiah is going to arrive and give them all the answers. It's not going to happen. It has to happen here.
Yeah, something I said to you, Tish, and Lebang yesterday when I chatted with them is that we've become over-reliant on state-led development. But the survival of the state and the ANC party in South Africa is dependent on them telling society that they are the main supplier of development. And so people are continually they have these expectations and they're waiting for development to come from the state. And that is, of course, a part of the problem, because we know the state can't sustain the promises that it's making. It can't sustain the level of development that it'd like to provide to society, and it can't be the main supplier of development, not in its current formation and with its current capacity. So I think This Is Us is spot on in that we look at how society can be a supplier of development.
Well, that's why we're interested in doing this every Tuesday, and I thank you for your time. Where can we find out more about the work that you guys do at the IJR?
So you can visit our website. It's ijr.org.za. You can visit the Afrobarometer, which is theafrobarometer.org. And we're also on Twitter. I think it's @_IJR_, if I'm not mistaken. And we're also on Facebook. So we post our research on there too. But on our website, there's a full list of publications.
Very, very good. Any closing parting shots from you, Lebang and Yatish?
Yeah,
go first.
Yeah, sure. From my end, since we started This Is Us and we really went on this journey, I think I've tried to take myself out of, just looking and really trying to participate in making those little changes. And I promise you, it's infectious, it's contagious. If we just focus on what we can do, then we'll be fine. We're no longer in that place where it's blaming government, expecting government. They're not going to do shit. And it's not only for us to know, but even that information needs to be shared. Everybody needs to just get with the program. So coming up with just solves as a people, that horizontal, that this trust here as a nation, that's where we're trying to hone in. And every single Tuesday at 7:30, that's what we're going to do. Every single Thursday on Life with Lebang at 11 o'clock, that's what I'm going to do.
Beautiful. Yatish, you get the last word.
Yeah, perfect. For me, I think, the whole way along this kind of journey, I think what we've always tried to think about is, even when we came up with the line, "This is us," part of it represented the fact when we say "this is us," we're saying this is all there is, that we cannot rely on, like institutions, we cannot rely on government. What we have to rely on is each other as a society. This is all there is. Us is all we have. And what we do amongst each other and what we do for each other has a huge role to play in what we do as a country over and above what government will provide us, because we know that probably won't be much.
Very good. That's all we got time for this morning. I want to again just say a big thank you to Jaynisha Patel, who joined us this morning and brought us some pretty useful information and very interesting info too. And we will see you again same time next week for another episode of This Is Us. Don't miss Lebang's show on Thursday for more. She's always got really interesting guests on there too.